There is something happening to you right now that you were not prepared for, not because you weren't warned, not because the signs weren't there, but because no one told you the full truth about what it means to truly see, to stop looking away, to let your awareness fall on the thing that has been running your life from behind the curtain. No one told you that the moment you meet the quantum watcher, the part of you that observes without flinching, your entire life shifts. Not metaphorically, not eventually, immediately, irrevocably, completely. And here's what makes this different from every other conversation you've had about awakening, about consciousness, about spiritual growth. We are not here to comfort you through the shift. We are here to help you see it clearly, because clarity is the only force that transforms without resistance. And what you can see clearly, you can no longer be controlled by. So before we go any further, I want you to do something. Right now, before your mind starts organizing what I'm saying into categories it already recognizes, I want you to notice something. Notice that you are watching this. Notice that somewhere behind your eyes, behind the thoughts already forming, behind the part of you that is deciding whether to trust what you're hearing, there is something that is simply observing, not reacting, not judging, not yet, just watching. That thing, that quiet, unblinking presence behind your experience, that is the quantum watcher. And the moment you recognize it, even for a fraction of a second, something in your reality has already shifted. Not because of belief, not because of intention, because of observation. Because at the most fundamental level of what physics has confirmed about the nature of reality, the observer does not simply witness what is there. The observer participates in determining what is there. The observer collapses infinite possibility into specific, measurable form. You are not a passive audience in your own life. You never were. But most people live as though they are. Most people spend their entire existence reacting to a reality they believe is fixed, solid, and happening to them, when the truth, confirmed at the quantum level, is that reality is a probability field. And what determines which probability becomes your experience is the quality, the frequency, and the direction of your observation. This is not what you think it is. This is not another video about manifesting your desires or vibrating at a higher frequency or thinking positive thoughts until the universe cooperates. This is something far more precise, far more confrontational, and far more real. Because the quantum watcher doesn't just change what you attract. The quantum watcher changes what you are. And once you meet it, once you truly, unflinchingly meet the part of you that can observe without collapsing into what it observes, your entire life shifts. Not because your circumstances change overnight, because you can no longer pretend you don't see what you see. And that inability to pretend is the most powerful force available to a human being. Your life will never be the same again. Not because something magical happened, because something true became visible. And what has been seen cannot be unseen. Let's begin. There is a particular kind of person who finds their way to this kind of content. You are not someone who stumbled here accidentally. Something in you has been moving toward this conversation for a long time, maybe years, maybe longer than that. You have felt the edges of something, some awareness pressing against the inside of your ordinary life. Some knowing that what you've been told about reality doesn't quite hold together under close examination. You've had moments of seeing through things, moments where the script of everyday life suddenly felt like exactly that, a script. Moments where your own reactions surprised you, where you watched yourself behave in ways you didn't choose, where you felt the strange vertigo of recognizing that something is running beneath the surface of your conscious mind, and that something has been making decisions you thought were yours. And here's what I want to say directly to that part of you that already knows you were right. What you sensed was real. The architecture beneath ordinary life is not a paranoid fantasy. It is a measurable, observable, documentable fact. And the reason it has taken this long to fully see it is not because you weren't ready. It's because seeing it clearly requires a specific kind of courage. The courage to watch without looking away, even when what you see dismantles something you needed to believe was solid. But here's what no one tells you about the moment your eyes begin to open. Here's what the spiritual teachers leave out, what the awakening content glosses over, what the manifestation coaches never mention. When awareness expands faster than the inner ground can steady itself, the first thing you experience is not peace, it's dissolution. The veil doesn't lift gently, it tears, and what you find on the other side is not a cleaner, lighter version of the life you are living. It's the rubble of every structure that life was built on. The inherited beliefs, the borrowed identity, the social scripts you were handed before you were old enough to question them, the mask worn so long you forgot there was a face underneath. That dissolution, that terrifying, disorienting collapse of what you thought was real, is not a malfunction. It is the quantum watcher doing exactly what it does. It is observation, collapsing of false probability into something more true. And it is the beginning, not the end, of everything. So today we are going to look at this together, not from a safe distance, not with the comfortable buffer of spiritual language that keeps the truth abstract enough to admire without having to live. We are going to look directly at what happens when the quantum watcher activates, what it does to your identity, your relationships, your sense of meaning, your experience of reality itself. We are going to look at why the path from seeing to being is longer and more treacherous than anyone prepares you for. And then, this is the part that matters most. We are going to look at what it means to become the observer fully. Not as a spiritual bypass, not as a way of hovering above your life, but as the most grounded, most embodied, most transformative act available to a human consciousness. Because here is the truth at the center of everything we are about to explore. The quantum watcher is not something you develop. It is something you recognize. It has always been there. It was there before the beliefs, before the identity, before the conditioning. It is the awareness that is aware of all of it. And the moment you stop confusing yourself with what you observe and recognize yourself as the one who is observing, everything changes. Not gradually, not eventually. In that moment, if this is landing for you, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It keeps this field of observers growing. Now let's look closer. The first thing that happens when awareness begins to expand is almost always misread as a gift. And it is in a sense. But it is the kind of gift that comes wrapped in something sharp. You begin to see patterns. You begin to notice what was invisible before. The architecture beneath ordinary life. The way conversations follow scripts, the way social roles are performed rather than inhabited, the way beliefs are inherited rather than chosen. You begin to see how much of what passes for personality is actually conditioning, how much of what feels like desire is actually programming, how much of what appears to be free choice is actually a predictable response to stimuli that were installed long before you had any say in the matter. At first, this feels like power. It feels like intelligence. It feels like finally having access to the real map when everyone else is navigating by a tourist brochure. And there is something genuinely valuable in that seeing. The ability to recognize conditioning, to perceive the structures beneath behavior, to observe the patterns that most people mistake for reality. This is a real form of clarity. It is the beginning of something important. But look closer, because something else is happening underneath that feeling of clarity. Something that is easy to miss precisely because it is wearing the costume of insight. What is actually happening is this. You are beginning to observe without being able to stop. You are developing the capacity to see through things. And that capacity, unchecked, ungrounded, unintegrated, begins to turn on everything, including the things worth keeping, including the people who matter to you, including your own capacity for warmth, connection, and ordinary human presence. Watch what happens next. The conversations that used to feel meaningful start to feel thin. The people around you start to look less like people and more like patterns, like walking collections of conditioning and unconscious response. The ordinary world starts to feel staged, and you start to feel like the only one who can see the stage for what it is, the only one who has the map, the only one who is truly awake while everyone else sleeps. That feeling. That particular feeling of being the one who sees what others miss. I want you to look at it very carefully right now, not to dismiss it, not to shame it, but to observe it with the same unflinching clarity you've been turning on the world around you, because that feeling, that subtle, seductive sense of being the exception, the one who is truly awake, the one who has outgrown the ordinary, that feeling is not what it appears to be. At the quantum level, what you observe, you become entangled with. The observer and the observed are not separate, they are in relationship. And when you observe the world through the lens of contempt, even a very sophisticated, philosophically articulate contempt, you do not transcend the world. You become bonded to it in a new and more invisible way. You think you are standing outside the matrix, watching it clearly, but you are still inside it. You are just standing in a corner of it that feels more elevated. This is not what you think it is. Here's what no one tells you about the early stages of expanded awareness. The sharpest danger is not ignorance. The sharpest danger is a mind that has learned to see through things, but has not yet learned what to do with what it sees. A mind that can deconstruct illusion faster than the heart can build something real in its place. A mind that mistakes the ability to observe for the completion of the journey, when in truth, the ability to observe is only the beginning, because there is a difference. A crucial, life-altering difference between the quantum watcher and the cold observer. And most people who step into expanded awareness never learn to tell them apart. The cold observer stands outside life, cataloging its patterns, seeing through its constructions, maintaining a careful distance from anything that might pull it back into the mess of being human. The cold observer feels like freedom. It feels like clarity. It feels like having finally escaped the prison of unconscious reaction. But it is not the quantum watcher. It is the ego wearing the quantum watcher's clothes. The quantum watcher does something different. It does something far more precise and far more powerful. It does not stand outside life and observe it from a safe distance. It enters life fully, completely, without armor, and remains aware while doing so. It is not detached. It is present. It is not cold. It is clear. And that distinction between detachment and presence, between coldness and clarity, is the entire difference between an awareness that liberates and an awareness that isolates. Let me show you something. There is a story about a man named Elias. Elias was a scholar, not in the academic sense, in the deeper sense. He was a man who had spent the better part of his adult life pursuing truth with a relentlessness that most people found unsettling. He had read the ancient texts, the Hermetic writings, the quantum physics, the depth psychology. He had sat in meditation for long hours. He had pulled back every curtain he could find and looked unflinchingly at what was behind it. By most measures of the awakening world, Elias was advanced. He could see through almost anything: social conditioning, unconscious programming, collective illusion. None of it escaped his perception. He could sit in a conversation and watch the entire architecture of the other person's conditioning playing out in real time. He could see the wound beneath the behavior, the fear beneath the anger, the inherited belief driving the choice. He saw it all, and he was absolutely, completely alone. Not because people didn't want to be near him. They did at first. There was something magnetic about his clarity, something that drew people toward him the way they are drawn toward anyone who seems to see clearly in a world that often feels blurry and confusing. But spending time with Elias had a particular quality to it that was difficult to name and impossible to ignore. Being with him felt like being observed rather than met, like being studied rather than known, like standing in front of a very precise, very intelligent mirror that reflected back every flaw, every pattern, every unconscious habit with perfect accuracy, but offered nothing warm in return. Over time, people stopped coming, not dramatically, not with confrontation or rupture. They simply drifted away, the way people do when a place stops feeling like somewhere they want to be. And Elias, watching them go, observed the pattern with the same clinical precision he applied to everything else. He told himself they were not ready for his level of awareness. He told himself that the discomfort they felt in his presence was simply the discomfort of being seen clearly, and that their retreat was a reflection of their own avoidance, not his limitation. He was right about part of that. He was catastrophically wrong about the rest. One morning, and this is the moment I want you to watch carefully, Elias was sitting in the early light, in the particular kind of silence he had cultivated over years of practice, and something happened that his considerable intellectual architecture had no category for. He noticed himself watching. Not the world outside, not the patterns of other people's conditioning. Himself. He noticed the observer, and for the first time in a very long time, he turned the full force of his awareness not outward but inward. And he watched what was actually there. What he saw stopped him completely. Underneath the clarity, underneath the precision, underneath the years of accumulated insight, there was a child who had learned very early that love was conditional and unpredictable. A child who had discovered that understanding things gave you a kind of control that belonging never could. A child who had decided, at some level too deep and too early to be called a decision, that if you could see everything clearly enough, you would never be hurt by what you didn't see coming. That if you could stand far enough outside the human mess, you would never be destroyed by being inside it. The cold observer wasn't wisdom, it was armor, the most sophisticated armor he had ever built, and the most invisible because it looked exactly like awakening. And here is what happened next. Here's the part that matters. Elias did not collapse. He did not fall into shame or self-recrimination. He did not decide that all his years of genuine insight were therefore worthless or false. He did something far more precise. He watched. He stayed with what he saw. He let the observation be complete, not rushing to fix it, not rushing to understand it, not rushing to integrate it into a new framework that would make him feel better about what he'd found. He simply watched the child underneath the scholar, and in that watching, in that full, unflinching, compassionate observation, something in him that had been frozen for a very long time began slowly to move. That is the quantum watcher, not the cold observer, not the one who sees through things from a safe distance, the one who turns the observation inward, the one who is willing to watch itself, the one who has the courage to see what the seeing has been protecting against. And you have been both Elias and the child. You have been the one who sees clearly and the one who built the armor that made the seeing feel safe. But today, you are here, and that means something in you is ready to look at both. I want to pause here and ask you something directly. Has there been a moment in your own life where the observation became armor? Where your clarity started functioning as distance rather than presence? Drop it in the comments. Not the analysis of it, just what you saw when you finally turned the watching inward. Let's go deeper into what you're actually seeing. The quantum mechanics of observation are not a metaphor. They are not a spiritual concept dressed in scientific language to give it credibility. They are a measurable, reproducible, experimentally confirmed description of how reality actually works at its most fundamental level. And what they reveal about the nature of consciousness and reality is so radical, so completely at odds with the common sense picture of the world that most people encounter it and file it away as interesting but not applicable, as something that happens at the subatomic level but doesn't touch the scale of ordinary human life. That filing away is the mistake. And it is a mistake worth examining closely. Here's what quantum mechanics actually tells us about observation. Before a quantum particle is observed, it does not exist in a single, definite state. It exists in a superposition, a simultaneous probability of all the states it could possibly be in. It is, in a very real sense, everywhere and nowhere at once. Every possible version of it exists as a probability. And then something happens. The particle is observed. A measurement is made. And in that moment, in the act of observation itself, the superposition collapses. The infinite probability field resolves into a single, specific, measurable reality. The observer does not simply detect what is already there. The observer participates in creating what is there, now. Here's where this stops being a physics lecture and starts being a description of your life. Because you are not a subatomic particle, but you are made of them. And the consciousness that observes, the awareness that watches, operates by the same fundamental principle at every scale of reality. What you consistently observe, you consistently collapse into form. What you consistently avoid observing remains in superposition, unresolved, unmeasured, continuing to exert influence from the quantum field of possibility in ways you cannot see and therefore cannot change. Think about that for a moment. Let it land fully before moving forward. What you avoid observing remains in superposition. It continues to influence your experience, your choices, your patterns, your reality, from a place you cannot reach with your conscious mind because you have never brought the light of observation to it. You have never collapsed it into something visible. And what remains invisible continues to run. This is not philosophy. This is quantum mechanics, and it is the precise reason why the quantum watcher, the part of you that can observe without flinching, without looking away, without collapsing into what it sees, is the most powerful position available to a human consciousness. Not because it controls reality, not because it forces outcomes or manifests desires, because it sees clearly. And clarity, the kind of clarity that comes from full, unflinching observation, is the only force that transforms without resistance. Because there is nothing to resist. There is only what is seen and the collapse of probability that follows the seeing. What you watch, you change. What you avoid controls you. This is where it gets precise. Most people, when they encounter the idea of the observer effect, apply it in one direction only. They think about observing their desires, their goals, their intended reality. They focus their attention on what they want to create and believe that the observation itself will collapse the probability field in their favor. And there's something real in that understanding, but it is incomplete in a way that makes it nearly useless for the people who need it most. Because the probability field does not discriminate between what you consciously intend to observe and what you unconsciously avoid observing. It responds to both. And in most human lives, the unconscious avoidances are far more powerful than the conscious intentions. The patterns you have never looked at directly, the wounds you have organized your entire personality around not having to feel, the beliefs about yourself and reality that you inherited before you had language to examine them. These are the quantum superpositions that are most actively shaping your experience. And they will continue to shape it regardless of how clearly you observe what you want, until you are willing to observe what you have been avoiding. This is the thing no one tells you about observation. The direction matters more than the intensity. You can be intensely focused on your desired reality while simultaneously running massive avoidance around the patterns that are generating your current reality, and the avoidance will win every time. Not because the universe is cruel, because the unobserved probability field is larger, because you are bringing the full force of your attention to the surface while the depth continues unobserved to determine the shape of your experience. The quantum watcher does not choose what to observe based on what is comfortable. The quantum watcher turns toward what has been avoided. Not because suffering is noble, not because darkness is more real than light, because what has been avoided is where the superposition is most active, where the unresolved probability is most densely influencing the field, where the act of clear observation will produce the most immediate, most profound collapse into something more true. Watch what happens when you stop. Stop right now in the middle of this transmission and ask yourself a single question, not the question of what you want, not the question of where you are going or what you are trying to create. Ask yourself this: what have I been refusing to look at? Not in a general, abstract way, specifically. What is the thing in your life, the pattern, the relationship, the belief about yourself, the recurring experience that you have been consistently, deliberately, even skillfully looking away from? What is the thing you have been managing, navigating around, explaining away, spiritualizing over, keeping busy enough to avoid feeling directly? You know what it is. You don't have to think hard to find it. It is already present in your awareness right now, because I just named the category and something in you immediately recognized the specific content. The mind might be trying to redirect, to generalize, to find a safer version of the answer, but the body already knows. The chest already knows. The stomach already knows. That thing, that specific, uncomfortable, inconvenient, possibly terrifying thing you have been refusing to look at, that is where the quantum watcher is needed most. That is where the unobserved superposition is most actively shaping your experience. That is where the act of clear observation will produce the most immediate transformation. Not because looking at it will fix it, not because understanding it will make it go away, because observation collapses the probability field. Because what you see clearly cannot continue to operate from the shadows. Because the moment you bring the full, unflinching light of your awareness to the thing you have been avoiding, its power over you changes. Not because you conquered it, because you saw it. And what has been truly seen cannot unsee itself. Pause here. This is not a thought exercise. This is an observation. I want you to close your eyes for a moment. Or if you are in a situation where that is not possible, simply soften your gaze and turn your attention inward. Take just a breath, not a performative breath, not the breath you take when someone tells you to breathe in a video. A real breath. One that reaches all the way down. And now, without trying to analyze it or explain it or make it mean something, I want you to simply observe what is present. Not what you think should be present, not the spiritual version of what you like to be feeling. What is actually there? The tightness, if there is tightness, the resistance, if there is resistance, the quiet hum of something that has been waiting to be seen. Don't try to change it. Don't try to release it or heal it or transform it. Just watch it. Watch it the way you would watch a flame, with full attention, with genuine curiosity, without needing it to be anything other than what it is. Notice who is watching. Notice that there is something in you that can observe the tightness without being the tightness. Something that can see the resistance without being defined by the resistance. Something that can be present with whatever is there without collapsing into it. That is the quantum watcher. That is you, not the pattern you are observing. The awareness that is doing the observing. And in this moment, in this simple act of watching without flinching, you are doing something that most people never do. You are meeting yourself in the place you have been avoiding, and the probability field is already shifting. Open your eyes when you are ready, and let's go deeper. Here is the layer underneath that. The dissolution that comes with expanded awareness. The collapse of inherited structures. The grief of a world that was never fully real but still gave you somewhere to stand. The disorientation of seeing through the scripts and costumes and borrowed beliefs. This is not a malfunction, but it is also not the destination. And this is where the path becomes genuinely dangerous. Not because the seeing is wrong, because the seeing, ungrounded, can become its own kind of prison. There are two awakenings, and almost every conversation about spiritual growth focuses on the first one while barely mentioning the second. The first awakening is the awakening of sight. The veil lifts. The architecture beneath appearances becomes visible. The patterns, the conditioning, the inherited illusions, all of it comes into focus with a sudden, startling clarity. This is the awakening that gets talked about, written about, romanticized. It is dramatic. It is unmistakable. It feels like finally arriving somewhere true after a lifetime of being handed maps of a place that didn't exist. The second awakening is the awakening of strength. This is the part where your inner life becomes stable enough to hold what you've seen, where the capacity to be present with truth, not just perceive it, but live it, embody it, carry it without being crushed by it, actually develops, where the observer learns not just to see clearly, but to remain clear while being fully inside the experience of being human, where the quantum watcher becomes not a way of hovering above life, but a way of entering it more completely than was ever possible before. The distance between those two awakenings, the gap between seeing and being, is where most of the suffering happens, where the dark nights of the soul occur, where the collapse, the isolation, the strange exile from your own previous life takes place. Not because you failed, because you are trying to breathe air your inner world hasn't adapted to yet, because sight expanded before strength did, because the quantum watcher activated before the ground was stable enough to hold what it was seeing. And here is the precise thing that happens in that gap, the thing that is worth watching very carefully because it is so easy to mistake for something else. When awareness expands faster than the ground can hold it, the mind does something very intelligent and very costly. It uses the awareness itself as armor. It turns the capacity for observation into a mechanism of protection. It learns to see through things, and then uses that seeing as a way of never having to be inside things, never having to be vulnerable, never having to be touched. This is not what you think it is. This looks like clarity. It feels like freedom. It presents itself as the natural result of having seen through illusion, a kind of clean, unattached presence that is no longer vulnerable to the chaos of unconscious human life. But it is not clarity. It is overwhelm wearing a philosopher's coat. It is a nervous system that has received more truth than it knows how to metabolize and has organized the truth itself into a defensive structure. And the quantum mechanics of this are precise. When you use observation as armor, when you observe in order to stay safe rather than in order to see truly, you are not collapsing the probability field in the direction of freedom. You are collapsing it in the direction of isolation. Because the quality of the observation determines the direction of the collapse. An observation motivated by fear produces a reality organized around protection. An observation motivated by genuine curiosity, genuine willingness to see, genuine courage to be present with what is there, that produces something entirely different. The quantum watcher is not motivated by fear. The quantum watcher is motivated by something that has no opposite. Not courage exactly, though it requires courage. Not love exactly, though it is deeply related to love. Something more like the simple, undefended willingness to see what is true. The willingness to be in the presence of reality without needing it to be different than it is. The willingness to watch without controlling, to observe without interpreting, to be present without armor. That willingness, that quality of observation, is what collapses the probability field in the direction of genuine transformation. Not because it forces a particular outcome, because it removes the distortion, because it allows reality to be what it is rather than what your fear needs it to be. And reality, when it is allowed to be what it is, has a tendency toward coherence, toward resolution, toward forms that serve life rather than forms that protect against it. Let me show you something else. There is a woman named Mira who spent 3 years in what she called her awakening. She had done the reading, the practices, the retreats. She had seen through the social conditioning, the inherited beliefs, the unconscious patterns. She had developed a genuine and sophisticated capacity for observation. She could sit in stillness for long periods. She could watch her thoughts without being swept away by them. She had, by every external measure of the awakening world, done the work. And she was miserable, not in an obvious way, not in a way that showed. Mira had become very good at presenting the surface of someone who had found peace. She spoke about presence, about non-attachment, about the beauty of impermanence. She helped other people with their patterns. She was known in her community as someone who had a kind of clarity that others found useful. But underneath all of that, underneath the fluency with spiritual language, underneath the genuine insight, underneath the real and hard-won capacity for observation, there was a loneliness so complete that it had stopped feeling like loneliness and started feeling like the nature of reality. She had concluded somewhere in the process of seeing through things that connection was an illusion. That intimacy was just two conditioned nervous systems temporarily resonating. That love was a biological mechanism dressed in metaphysical clothing. She had observed her way into a reality where nothing was real enough to matter, and then one day, without ceremony or preparation, her younger sister called her crying. Not about anything profound, about something ordinary and painful and human. A relationship that had ended, a grief that had no philosophical resolution, a wound that was simply a wound. And Mira, who had spent 3 years learning to observe without reacting, found herself doing something she had not done in longer than she could remember. She felt it, not observed it, felt it. The sister's pain landed in her body before her mind could organize it into a pattern or a category or a teaching. And instead of watching from behind the glass of her carefully maintained awareness, Mira was simply there, present, undefended, human. She cried, not because she had analyzed the situation and determined that crying was the appropriate response, because something in her that had been frozen for 3 years suddenly thawed, because the genuine, undefended presence of another person's pain broke through the armor that her awareness had become. Because for one moment she stopped observing and simply was. And in that moment, in that single, unguarded, completely ordinary human moment, she understood something that 3 years of sophisticated practice had not been able to show her. The quantum watcher is not the one who stands outside life and observes it. The quantum watcher is the one who is fully inside life and remains aware while being there. The observer does not protect you from reality. The observer allows you to be present with reality without being destroyed by it. Not because it keeps you at a safe distance, because it keeps you clear while you are close. That is the difference. And it is everything. The bridge from Mira's story to yours is this. Somewhere in your own journey of expanding awareness, there has been a moment, possibly many moments, where the observation became armor, where the capacity to see through things became a way of not having to be inside things, where the genuine and hard-won clarity you developed started functioning as a barrier between you and the full, undefended experience of being alive. And the thing you have been avoiding looking at, the thing I asked you to identify earlier, is probably located exactly there. In the place where the armor is thickest, in the place where the observation is most controlled, most managed, most carefully directed away from something specific. Because the quantum watcher in you knows that the moment you truly see it, the moment you bring full, undefended observation to the thing you have been most carefully not looking at, something will change that cannot be unchanged. And part of you, the part that built the armor, is not sure it is ready for that. But here's what I want you to understand. Here's what the quantum mechanics actually tell you about this moment. You are already in the probability field of that transformation. The fact that you are here, watching this, allowing these words to reach the place in you that recognizes them, this is not an accident. This is the quantum field already responding to the quality of your attention. You are already in the act of collapsing the probability towards something more true. The only question is whether you will let the observation be complete, whether you will watch all the way through, or whether you will look away at the last moment the way you have looked away before. You don't have to look away. Not today. Tell me something in the comments. What is the specific illusion about yourself or your reality that began to dissolve the moment you stopped managing around it and looked at it directly? What fell apart under clear observation, and what did you find underneath it? Let's go deeper into the mechanics of what happens when you don't. When the quantum watcher is fully active, when observation is complete, undefended, and directed precisely at what has been avoided, three things happen simultaneously. They are not sequential. They are not the result of effort or practice or spiritual achievement. They are the natural consequence of clear seeing. They are what the collapse of the probability field actually looks like from the inside. The first thing that happens is recognition. Not understanding, recognition. There is a difference. Understanding is the mind organizing information into a framework. Recognition is the awareness meeting something it already knew. When you observe clearly what you've been avoiding, the first thing you experience is not surprise. It is the strange, disorienting, deeply relieving sensation of something you have always known finally being admitted. The body knows before the mind. The body has always known. The tension, the tightness, the recurring patterns, the inexplicable reactions. These were never random. They were the body's way of registering what the mind refused to observe. And when the observation finally arrives, the body recognizes it. Something settles, something that has been braced against the unacknowledged truth begins, slowly, to release. The second thing that happens is disidentification. When you observe something clearly, when you see it fully, without the distortions of avoidance or the armor of managed distance, you automatically step out of identification with it. This is not something you do, it is something that happens as a natural consequence of clear seeing. You cannot be fully inside a pattern and fully observing it simultaneously. The act of observation creates a distinction between the observer and the observed. And that distinction, that space between what you are watching and the awareness that is doing the watching, is freedom. Not the freedom of having escaped something, the freedom of having recognized that you are not the thing you are afraid of being. You are the awareness that can see it, and what you can see you are not. This is not philosophy. This is the direct, measurable consequence of the observer effect applied to the patterns of your own consciousness. You are not your conditioning. You are the awareness that can observe your conditioning. You are not your wound. You are the awareness that can see your wound clearly enough to stop organizing your entire life around protecting it. You are not the pattern that has been running your reality. You are the quantum watcher that, in the act of truly seeing the pattern, collapses its power over you. The third thing that happens is reorientation. When the probability field collapses, when the unobserved superposition resolves into something visible, something specific, something that can be met directly, the energy that was being spent maintaining the avoidance becomes available for something else. This is not a metaphor. The amount of psychic energy required to consistently not look at something is enormous. The vigilance required to keep a particular truth out of conscious observation, to manage the conversations, the situations, the internal states that might bring you too close to what you are avoiding, this is a full-time occupation of a significant portion of your awareness. And when the observation finally happens, when the avoidance is no longer necessary, because the thing has been seen, all of that energy returns. Not as excitement or elation, as clarity, as the quiet, grounded sense of having more of yourself available than you did before. This is what the quantum watcher does, not through effort, through seeing, through the simple, radical, transformative act of looking directly at what is there and refusing to look away until the observation is complete. Now watch what happens in your body when you hear this. There is something in you that knows exactly what I am describing. Not as a concept, as an experience. You have had moments of this, moments where something you had been avoiding suddenly came into clear view, and you felt the three things I just described happening simultaneously. The recognition, the disidentification, the reorientation. Moments where the truth arrived not as a blow, but as a release, where seeing something clearly felt like setting down a weight you had been carrying so long you had forgotten it was there. Those moments were the quantum watcher activating. They were the observer effect operating at the scale of your own consciousness. And they were not accidents. They were the natural result of the observation becoming complete enough to collapse the probability. The question is not whether you are capable of this. You have already done it. The question is whether you are willing to do it deliberately. Whether you are willing to turn the quantum watcher toward the specific places you have been most carefully avoiding. Whether you're willing to let the observation be complete, not just in the comfortable places, not just in the areas where seeing clearly feels safe, but in the exact places where the armor is thickest and the avoidance is most entrenched. Because those places, the places where the avoidance is most organized, most defended, most sophisticated, those are the places where the unobserved superposition is most actively shaping your experience. Those are the places where the quantum field is most densely concentrated with unresolved probability. And those are the places where the act of clear observation will produce the most immediate, most profound, most irreversible transformation. Your life will never be the same again. not because of what you will do with what you see, because of what the seeing itself does, because observation collapses the probability field, because what is seen clearly cannot continue to operate from the shadows, because the quantum watcher, once activated, cannot be deactivated. Once you have truly seen something, you cannot unsee it. Once the probability has collapsed, it cannot return to superposition. The transformation is not something you will experience later as a result of applying what you've learned. The transformation is happening now in the act of seeing. This is where it gets precise. Let me take you into a second parable, because there is something about this next layer that requires a story to make it fully visible. Something that the analytical mind can understand, but that the deeper awareness can only grasp through narrative. Watch this carefully. There was a city built entirely inside a hall of mirrors. Not a metaphorical city, a real one, with buildings and streets and markets and people who were born there and lived their whole lives there. The mirrors were everywhere, floor to ceiling, wall to wall, every surface reflective. And the people of the city had grown up learning to navigate by reflections. They knew the city not by looking at it directly, but by reading the images that bounce from mirror to mirror, layer upon layer, each reflection on a reflection of a reflection of a reflection. Most people in the city never questioned this. It was simply how the world worked. You looked at the reflection to understand the reality. You made your decisions based on what the mirrors showed you. You understood yourself by seeing your image reflected back from 1,000 different surfaces, each one slightly different. Each one showing you a version of yourself that was shaped by the angle and distance and quality of the particular mirror you happened to be looking at. There was a young man in this city named Kyle. Kyle was, by the standards of his world, extraordinarily perceptive. He had learned to read the reflections with a sophistication that most people never achieved. He could track the way an image changed as it bounced from mirror to mirror, could calculate the distortions, could account for the angles. He was known as someone who saw clearly, and he did, more clearly than almost anyone around him. But what he was seeing clearly was still reflections. What he was navigating by was still images of images of images, and he had never, in his entire life, looked directly at anything. One day, Kyle found a room that had no mirrors. He found it by accident, or what felt like accident, though nothing in the quantum field is accidental. A door that had always been there, but that he had never noticed. Perhaps because the mirrors near it had always shown him something more interesting to look at. He opened the door and stepped inside, and for the first time in his life, he was in a space where there was no reflection, where there was only direct seeing, where the thing he was looking at was simply the thing itself. Not an image of itself, not a reflection of an image, not a representation mediated by a surface designed to show him something. The experience was disorienting in a way he had no language for. Everything looked different without the mediation of the mirrors. Simpler, in a sense. More specific, less dramatic, but more real. He could see the texture of things, the actual quality of the light, the way objects occupied space without the infinite multiplication of their reflections. It was quieter than he expected, more ordinary, and more alive. He went back to the mirrored city, and everything had changed. Not the city, he had changed. He could now see with a clarity he had not had before that what everyone around him was navigating by was not reality, but the image of reality. that the decisions being made, the identities being constructed, the relationships being formed, all of it was based on reflections of reflections, each one carrying the distortions of every mirror it had passed through. He could see this clearly, and for a while, that seeing felt like the gift he had always been seeking. But then he made the same mistake that Elias made. He began to use his clarity about the mirrors as a way of standing apart from the people navigating by them. He began to see the mirror navigation not with compassion, but with a kind of exasperated pity. He had been to the room with no mirrors. He knew what direct seeing felt like, and everyone around him was still looking at reflections. How could they not see what he saw? It took him a long time, longer than he would like to admit, to understand what he had missed. The room with no mirrors had not been the end of the journey. It had been the beginning of a different kind of seeing. Not the seeing that stands apart and observes the limitation of others. The seeing that goes back into the mirrored hall, fully aware of the mirrors, fully clear about the distortions, and meets the people there with enough warmth and enough presence to be genuinely useful to them. Not because they need to be rescued from the mirrors, because they deserve to be met by someone who is not afraid of being in the hall with them. The quantum watcher does not stand outside the hall of mirrors, superior and separate, cataloging the distortions. The quantum watcher enters the hall, remains clear about what is reflection and what is real, and brings that clarity into genuine contact with what is there. The observer does not protect itself from the observed. The observer meets the observed with full presence. And it is that meeting, that genuine, undefended contact between the clarity of the watcher and the reality of what is watched, that produces transformation. And you have been in the room with no mirrors. You have had the experience of direct seeing. You know what it feels like to see through the reflections to something more real. The question is whether you have brought that seeing back into the hall. Whether you have let the clarity of the quantum watcher become a way of being more present, more genuinely available, more fully human, or whether you have let it become a reason to stand at a careful distance from the hall and its inhabitants. Because here's what the quantum mechanics tell you about that choice. The probability field does not respond to clarity that is kept separate from the field. It responds to clarity that enters the field. The observer effect requires that the observer and the observed be in genuine relationship, not the same, not merged, but in contact. And the quality of that contact, the willingness to be genuinely present, genuinely affected, genuinely available to what is there, that is what determines the direction and the depth of the transformation. This is where it gets most personal and most precise. Let's do this again. Let's go into the practice one more time, but deeper this time, deeper than the first observation. Because the first practice was about recognizing the quantum watcher, noticing the awareness behind the experience. This one is about something more specific. This one is about bringing the quantum watcher into contact with the thing you have been most carefully keeping it away from. Pause here. This is not a thought exercise. This is an observation. Take a breath. Let it be real. And now, and I want you to do this with full willingness, with the full force of your capacity for clear seeing. I want you to bring to mind the thing you identified earlier, the specific thing you have been avoiding. The pattern, the truth, the relationship, the belief about yourself that you have been managing around rather than looking at directly. Let it be present. Don't analyze it. Don't try to understand it. Don't begin constructing the story of why it is there or what it means or what you should do about it. Just look at it. The way you would look at something you have never seen before, with genuine curiosity, with the willingness to be surprised by what you find, with the understanding that you are not here to fix it or change it or heal it. You are here to see it fully, completely, without looking away. Notice what happens in your body as you look. Notice the resistance, if there is resistance. Notice the impulse to redirect, to explain, to contextualize. Notice all of that. And then notice what is underneath it. What is actually there when you look past the resistance to the thing itself. And now, this is the most important part. Notice that you are still here. Notice that the looking has not destroyed you. Notice that the thing you have been avoiding, the thing your mind has been organizing such elaborate strategies to keep out of direct observation, is simply there. It is not as large as the avoidance made it seem. It is not as dangerous as the armor implied. It is simply something that has been waiting to be seen, and in this moment, you are seeing it. Say this either aloud or in the quiet of your awareness. I see them. I am not this. I am the one who sees. Let that land. Don't rush past what you just said. The first sentence is observation. The second sentence is disidentification. The third sentence is the recognition of the quantum watcher. 3 sentences that, spoken with genuine awareness, contain more transformative power than years of spiritual practice conducted from a safe distance. I see this. I am not this. I am the one who sees. Open your eyes, and let's look at what comes next. Here's what that reveals. The moment you stop identifying with what you observe and recognize yourself as the one who is observing, the entire architecture of your suffering changes, not because the suffering disappears, because its relationship to you changes, because you are no longer inside it in the same way. You are the awareness in which it is occurring. And awareness, unlike the contents of awareness, cannot be damaged by what it contains. The quantum watcher cannot be wounded by what it watches. It can be present with the wound. It can see the wound clearly, completely, without armor. But it is not the wound. It was never the wound. This is the recognition that changes everything. This is the shift that your life will never recover from. In the best possible sense. Because once you know, experientially and not just conceptually, that you are the observer and not the observed, the entire game changes. The patterns that have been running your life lose their automatic authority. Not because you conquered them, because you can see them. And what you can see clearly, you can no longer be unconsciously controlled by. But here's the layer underneath that. The one that most conversations about the observer never reach. Recognizing yourself as the quantum watcher is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of a new kind of responsibility, because the observer, once activated, does not get to stand in neutral forever. The quantum watcher is not a permanent vacation from the work of being human. It is the ground from which that work becomes possible in a completely new way. Here's what I mean. Before the quantum watcher activates, before you recognize yourself as the awareness behind the experience rather than the experience itself, your engagement with life is primarily reactive. Things happen and you respond. Patterns activate and you follow them. The conditioning runs and you think you are choosing. This is not a moral failure. It is simply what happens when the observer is asleep. when consciousness is so identified with the contents of its experience that it cannot see the contents clearly enough to have genuine choice about them. Once the quantum watcher activates, once you recognize the observer and can maintain that recognition even in the midst of experience, something new becomes possible. Not just observation, participation, conscious, chosen, deliberate participation in the probability field of your own reality. Not because you are now controlling reality, because you are now genuinely present with it. Because you are bringing the full force of clear awareness into contact with what is actually there, rather than reacting to the distorted reflections of an unexamined mind. This is the second awakening, the awakening of strength, the capacity to hold what you see without being crushed by it. To be present with the full complexity of human experience, the grief, the beauty, the confusion, the love, the loss, the ordinary and the extraordinary, and remain clear, not detached, clear, not cold, grounded, not hovering above life, fully inside it, with the quantum watcher fully active. And this is the part that no one tells you about. This requires something that the first awakening does not require. It requires the willingness to rebuild, to take the rubble of the dismantled illusions and construct something new, not the same structures, not the inherited beliefs and borrowed identities, something chosen, something yours, something built on the ground of clear seeing rather than the foundation of unexamined assumption. This means choosing what matters, not because you were told it should matter, because you, from the ground of the quantum watcher, from the clarity of the observer who has seen through the inherited scripts and is no longer running them automatically, you choose what will become significant through your attention, your integrity, your presence, your love. This is where meaning returns, not the meaning that was handed to you before you were old enough to question it, not the borrowed significance of social scripts and collective goals, the meaning that emerges when a consciousness that has seen through illusion turns its attention toward what it genuinely values. When the quantum watcher, having collapsed the false probabilities, begins to participate in collapsing the field in the direction of what is actually true for you. This is not manifestation in the shallow sense. This is something far more fundamental. This is the quantum observer doing what it was always designed to do, not just watching, but through the quality and direction of its watching, participating in the ongoing creation of reality. Not by forcing, not by controlling, by seeing clearly and letting what it sees clearly become the ground of how it engages with everything. Here's what the ancient traditions understood that modern spiritual culture often loses. The observer is not the destination. The observer is the ground. The awareness that watches is not something you arrive at and stay in, floating above your life in a permanent state of detached clarity. It is the foundation from which you enter life more completely than was ever possible before. More present, more available, more genuinely yourself. Because when you are no longer identified with the patterns, you are free to choose which patterns to embody. When you are no longer running the inherited scripts, you are free to write something new. When you are no longer collapsed into the wound, you are free to let the wound become wisdom, not by bypassing it, not by transcending it, but by seeing it so clearly that it transforms in the light of that seeing into something that serves rather than controls. The alchemists understood this lead into gold, not by eliminating the lead, by transforming it through a process that requires heat, pressure, and precise attention. Your wounds, your collapse, your dismantled worldview, your stripped down understanding of what is false, none of it has to be wasted. It can become the ground you build on with intention. The quantum watcher transforms not by rejecting what it sees, but by seeing it so completely, so precisely, so fully, that the seeing itself is the transformation. This is where we come to the community of observers. And I want to speak to this directly because it matters more than it might initially seem. The quantum watcher does not operate in isolation. This is not a contradiction of the observer's independence. It is a deeper understanding of what observation actually is. When a quantum system is observed, the observer and the observed become entangled. They enter into a relationship that changes both. And when multiple observers bring their attention to the same field, when a community of people committed to clear seeing turns its collective awareness toward the same territory, the effect is not additive, it is multiplicative. The clarity of each observer amplifies the clarity of every other. The field becomes more coherent, the probability collapses more completely. The transformation becomes more available to everyone in the field. This is why the community of people watching this, the field of observers that has formed around this channel, around this particular kind of seeing, is not just a collection of individuals who happen to be interested in the same content. It is a quantum field, a field of collective observation that is more powerful than the sum of its parts. And your presence in that field, your willingness to watch, to not look away, to bring the full force of your awareness to what is actually there, contributes to the coherence of the entire field. So here's the invitation. In the comments below this transmission, I want you to share one thing. Not a summary of what you learned, not a report on your spiritual progress. One specific thing that you saw during this transmission that you had been avoiding seeing. One thing that came into clear view when you looked directly at it instead of managing around it. One thing that the quantum watcher in you finally turned toward. You don't have to have it figured out. You don't have to know what it means or what to do with it. Just name it. Because naming it is an act of observation, and observation collapses the probability field. And your observation, shared in this field of collective seeing, contributes to the coherence that makes it easier for everyone else to see clearly too. If you want to say it simply, say this: I see it now. And it cannot unsee itself, because that is the truth. What has been truly seen cannot unsee itself. What has been brought into clear observation cannot return to the shadows in the same way. The probability has collapsed. The transformation is already in motion. And your willingness to name it, to speak it into the shared field, is the final act of observation that makes it real. Now let's bring this to the integration that this transmission is pointing toward. Because everything we have covered, the quantum mechanics of observation, the two awakenings, the difference between the cold observer and the quantum watcher, the parable of Elias and Mira and Kyle, the practices of direct seeing, all of it is pointing toward a single, simple, radical principle that can be lived. That must be lived, say, if it is to be anything more than interesting content. The principle is this: Observation is the most powerful act available to a human consciousness, not because it controls reality, but because it sees reality clearly. And clarity is the only force that transforms without resistance. Everything else, the manifestation practices, the healing modalities, the spiritual frameworks, the therapeutic approaches, all of it is downstream from this. All of it is either a form of clear observation or a form of managed avoidance. And the difference between the two is not in the technique. It is in the quality of the seeing, in whether the observation is complete or partial, in whether the awareness is genuinely present with what it is observing or maintaining a careful distance that keeps it safe, but also keeps it separated from the full power of the observer effect. The integration principle for this transmission is this: for the next 24 hours, every time you notice yourself managing around something rather than looking at it directly, every time you feel the impulse to redirect your attention away from something uncomfortable, every time you catch yourself in the act of maintaining one of your careful, sophisticated avoidances, pause. Take a breath and turn the quantum watcher toward exactly that, not to fix it, not to heal it, not to understand it, just to see it fully without looking away. And notice what happens. Notice the recognition, notice the disidentification, notice the reorientation, notice how the energy that was being spent on the avoidance becomes available for something else. Notice how the probability field responds to clear seeing. Do this not as the spiritual practice that you perform for 24 hours and then return to your regular patterns. Do this as the beginning of a new relationship with your own awareness. The beginning of living as the quantum watcher, rather than as the person who occasionally glimpses the quantum watcher and then returns to identification with the patterns. Because this is not a destination you reach and then rest in. This is a way of moving through life, a quality of attention that, once cultivated, changes the texture of every experience. Not by making every experience comfortable or easy or spiritually elevated, by making every experience real, by bringing the full force of clear awareness into genuine contact with what is actually there, rather than with the managed, distorted, carefully curated version of reality that the unexamined mind presents as the world. You were never meant to look away. This is the thing that is most true about you. Before the conditioning, before the inherited beliefs, before the armor was built, and the avoidances were organized and the cold observer was constructed as a protection against the vulnerability of genuine seeing, before all of that, there was an awareness that looked at everything with complete, undefended curiosity, an awareness that had no need to manage its experience because it was not afraid of its experience, an awareness that was the quantum watcher in its most natural, most fundamental state. That awareness is still there. It has always been there. It was there before the patterns, and it will be there after them. It is the ground of your being, not the product of your development. You did not earn it. You did not create it. You cannot lose it. You can only recognize it or fail to recognize it. You can only align with it or mistake yourself for the patterns it is watching. And the moment you recognize it, the moment the quantum watcher sees itself, everything changes, not because a new version of you has been created, because the version of you that was always true has been seen clearly, and what has been truly seen cannot be unseen. Your life will never be the same again, not because of what you will do differently tomorrow, though you will do things differently. Not because of the insights you have gained, though the insights are real, because something has shifted in the probability field of your own consciousness, because the observation has been made, because the quantum watcher has turned its gaze inward and seen itself. And in that seeing, the infinite superposition of who you might be has collapsed into something more specific, more true, more yours than anything that was handed to you before you were old enough to choose. This is not the end of the journey. It is the recognition that you have been on it all along, that every moment of avoidance was a step toward this seeing, that every piece of armor was pointing toward the vulnerability it was protecting, that every cold, careful, sophisticated distance you maintained was the quantum field's way of holding the pressure until you were ready to turn toward what the pressure was pointing at. You are ready. You have always been ready. The fact that you are here, watching this, allowing these words to reach the place in you that recognizes them. This is the quantum watcher recognizing itself. This is the observer seeing the observer. And in that recognition, the probability field of your entire life has just shifted. Not because I told you it would, because you looked, because you did not look away. Because the courage that brought you here, the same courage that has been quietly present beneath every moment of avoidance, waiting for the moment when the seeing would be possible. That courage is the quantum watcher itself. It was never absent. It was waiting to be recognized. So here's what I want to leave you with. Not a summary, not a list of takeaways, a single observation that contains everything we have explored. The observer is the most powerful position in the universe, not because it controls, not because it forces or manifests or attracts, because it sees clearly. And what is seen clearly, what is brought into the full, undefended, unflinching light of genuine observation, cannot continue to be what it was before it was seen. The probability collapses. The transformation is not a future event. It is the present act of seeing. You are the quantum watcher. You have always been the quantum watcher. Every moment of genuine seeing in your life, every moment where the truth arrived not as a blow but as a recognition, where something you had been carrying suddenly became visible and in the seeing became lighter. Every one of those moments was the quantum watcher doing what it does, naturally, effortlessly, without technique or achievement or spiritual progress. The only practice is this: keep looking. Keep turning toward what you have been looking away from. Keep bringing the full force of your awareness to the exact places where the avoidance is most organized. Not because suffering is noble, because the unobserved superposition is where the most power is held. And the moment you bring clear observation to it, that power becomes yours. Not to wield, to embody, to live from, to be. If this transmission reached the place in you that recognizes it, if something in you saw itself in these words, then stay in this field. Subscribe to this channel not as a consumer of content, but as a member of the field of observers. Because the work we do here is not informational, it is observational. Each transmission is a new invitation to look at something you have been avoiding. Each practice is a new opportunity to let the quantum watcher do what it was designed to do. Each community of observers who brings their collective seeing to the same field amplifies the clarity for everyone in it. When the noise of the day has settled, when you find yourself reacting instead of watching, come back to this transmission and let it meet you from a different place in you than it met you today. And if you know someone who is already at the edge of the seeing, already sensing that something has been waiting to be looked at, share this with them. Not to convince them, because your act of sharing gives them permission to look, and that permission becomes part of the field you are both standing in. What one observer offers another is not information. It is the courage to see, and that courage, passed between two people, amplifies the clarity for both. Share this transmission with someone who is ready to look, not someone who needs to be convinced, someone who is already at the edge of the seeing, already feeling the pressure of the unobserved probability, already sensing that there is something they have been avoiding that is ready to be seen. Give them the permission that this transmission gave you. Give them the field of observers to step into. Give them the quantum watcher. Because the most generous thing one observer can do for another is to say, I see it too, and it is safe to look. And the looking itself is the transformation. You were never meant to look away. The quantum watcher in you has always known this, and now, finally, you have looked. And what has been seen cannot be unseen. And your life, the real one, the one that was always waiting beneath the patterns and the armor and the borrowed scripts, that life has already begun to shift. Not tomorrow, not as a result of what you do with what you've seen now, in this moment, in the act of seeing itself. The observer is awake, and reality has no choice but to respond. The next step in this seeing is understanding what happens when you stop reacting entirely and simply watch, and how that shift rewrites the way others perceive you at a fundamental level. That is exactly what the video, once you stop reacting and start watching, they completely rewrite who they think you are, goes into. The observer effect does not only transform your inner field, it transforms the field between you and every person in your life. Watch that next, and